This is the Open University in the Learning Zone on BBC Two. During the 1980s, medics in Barcelona were presented with a mystery. What was causing the severe asthma outbreaks clustered around the harbour and industrial zones? Statistical techniques put them on the right track.
Toledo, Ohio, in the 1920s. Local doctors were aware that the rate of asthma attacks in a certain district of East Toledo was unusually high. But what was causing the problem? The finger of suspicion pointed to a linseed oil mill. Certainly all the asthma sufferers had commented on the smell of linseed oil. But detailed investigations showed that the flaxseed particles involved in linseed oil production were too heavy to be windborne. Linseed could not have caused the asthma. But the same factory also produced an oil with no smell, castor oil. And castor bean dust was light enough to be windborne.
Some years ago, I reported quite a large number of cases of asthma which were occasioned by the grinding of castor bean dust in a castor bean mill in Toledo. There were some 200 of these patients living within a radius of a mile or so of this plant. The matter got into the courts, and this factory was prohibited from having anything to do with the handling of castor beans. They were not even allowed to import a single castor bean, much less grind any.
You awake again? You're feeling a bit better? Where are you? You're in hospital. Asthma is a condition in which the bronchial tubes are unduly irritable, what I call twitchy tubes, so that if a patient who's got these twitchy tubes inhales something to which they're likely to be irritable, namely an allergen, such as grass pollen or something like that, or maybe fumes or something like that, then in that situation the airways will respond and narrow down. Once you've got narrowed tubes, it's more difficult to get air in and out, and the patient will complain of breathlessness, wheeziness, and sometimes cough or tightness in the chest.
I'm just going to pass this over the back of the tongue.
It's quite red, isn't it?
Yes, yes,
It's almost asthmatic.
it's quite inflamed, isn't it? Yes.
Many people regard certain things as causing asthma, when really what they mean is causing the acute attack in somebody who has already got asthma, and there is quite a difference. It is, of course, very common. It occurs in about 15% of primary school children and is twice as common in boys as in girls. In adulthood, it occurs in about 6% of the UK population and tends to be more common in women than men. The reasons for this are not clear. Nevertheless, of course, it does represent a very significant workload on the NHS. The curious thing about asthma is that it is very variable. Sometimes you'll be fine, sometimes you'll be bad, and occasionally it's very obvious what has set you off. You've maybe been in contact with a cat and you get wheezy. But you do sometimes find times when all of a sudden quite a lot of people have asthma, a sort of epidemic if you like. Some of these causes are identifiable and obvious, others are a complete mystery.
And it was just this type of occasional serious outbreak of severe asthma symptoms, each lasting only about 4 hours, that was seen at casualty units in Barcelona hospitals in the 1980s. The very first attack was on August the 5th, 1981.
Our residents noticed that in the emergency room came at that time much more asthmatic people than usually. You know? We used to have about 1 or 2 asthmatics per day, and at these days, some of these days, we notice perhaps 15, 20 patients. If they arrive at any hospital in Barcelona, normally they respond very well to the bronchodilators, but they were really very severe asthmatics. And we have to say that normally the crisis began during walking in the street, and it was a very, very sudden attack of asthma.
In the autumn of 1984, after 7 of these serious but short-lived asthma outbreaks, the Barcelona Asthma Collaborative Group was formed. A leading member of this group was Dr. Josep Anto.
The group was made up of about 20 different people coming from very different specialities. We had physicians, epidemiologists, but also chemists, biologists, meteorologists, and it was very exciting to be involved in such kind of multidisciplinary group. The first task that the group took at that time was to review the available data and to select the best investigation design for the future. And it was not easy, especially because different points of view arised from the different specialities. And we finally decided to establish a very large register of emergency room admissions, including all the hospitals in the city, providing populational-based data, not only data for one hospital, but also data for all the residents in the city, and to provide a very good definition of asthma.
The information that was collected for the register was the name, age, and date and time of arrival for every patient admitted to casualty suffering from either chronic bronchitis or asthma. On the 26th of November 1984, shortly after the formation of the group, there was yet another severe asthma outbreak in Barcelona. We can see the evidence for the outbreak in this time series plot. Time runs along the horizontal axis from the 18th of November to the 18th of December. The vertical axis represents the number of asthma admissions per day. And because the points are ordered over time, it makes sense to join them up with lines. There does indeed appear to have been a big increase in the number of asthma cases on the 26th of November. But does this tell us anything?
You've got to remember that when you've got any collection of numbers, one of them, maybe more if they're equal, but one of them is going to be the biggest. Whether there's anything sort of significant about this biggest number is a tricky question. Maybe it's the biggest number because there's something special causing it, but maybe it's just an outcome of a normal level of random variation. You have to be more sophisticated to check this kind of thing out, and we have to use statistical models. The Barcelona group did this, and they found that such a peak as this was very unlikely to have occurred just by chance, and is more likely to have some other kind of cause.
So there's clearly a bunching, what statisticians would call a cluster of asthma outbreaks in time. But there was also strong evidence of a different type of clustering, a geographical one. This map of Barcelona shows its administrative districts. And here are the locations of the asthma attacks of November the 26th, 1984. Many happened in or close to District 5. But the attacks occurred during the day, and as this region is the administrative and historical centre of the city, the daytime population is going to be greater than the resident population. So is there only a clustering in the centre of Barcelona because there are more people there, rather than because they are more likely to have asthma attacks? To eliminate this effect, the group took the numbers and adjusted them. They calculated the number of attacks per 100,000 people, a rate of attack, and plotted those instead across each region. The higher the rate, the more intense the colour. And the group found that the apparent cluster around the city centre still showed up. But there may be other reasons why this apparent clustering is misleading.
Well, these rates have also actually been age standardized. Suppose the condition of interest is particularly prevalent in say, old people. Then, if you observe a geographical cluster of cases, maybe that's just because there are a lot of old people thereabouts. And sure enough, Barcelona's District 5 does have rather a lot of elderly folk. Now, the way the age standardization is done is to look at numbers of sufferers in each age group. And what you do is adjust the total number of people in each age group to better match the age profile of the entire city. And then you adjust the numbers of sufferers in each age group by exactly the same factor. And then you calculate the rate from these adjusted figures, and you've got rid of the effect of different age distributions.
The Barcelona investigators checked out the geographical distribution of age standardized rates for each of the first 12 asthma outbreaks.
The data that we got from the register was enough not only to demonstrate the occurrence of different asthma outbreaks, but also to provide good descriptions of the geographical and time patterns of such outbreaks. And in both cases, we observed a very striking clustering. Most of the cases were clustered around noon, some days earlier in the morning, some days perhaps a bit later in the afternoon, but always with a very striking time cluster. And there was not only a time cluster, but also a geographical cluster, so people experienced the asthma attacks at the same time and in the same place. The geographical cluster was mostly around the districts near to the harbor of the city, and the overall picture was a one that can be easily labeled as a point source outbreak.
But if there was a point source, where exactly was it? They asked local agencies like the police, the harbour administration, the fire brigade and the local council to identify any unusual environmental agent which was produced on asthma outbreak days and so might be related to the attacks. No evidence was forthcoming until in early 1987, nearly 6 years after the first epidemic, harbour authorities reported that outbreaks had twice occurred on the same days as soybean unloading. But surely soybeans couldn't be to blame.
When we were aware about the ship unloading soybeans coming from Toledo, Ohio, we didn't expect soybeans be associated with the asthma outbreaks. And this was mainly because there were no reports in the scientific literature linking soybeans with asthma. And on the other hand, soybeans is a worldwide used product, and no evidence is that can produce asthma outbreaks. It was strange, but we were aware about reports showing that coffee workers are sensitized to castor bean. And this is due to the fact that the bags used for coffee have been used before to transport castor beans. And castor bean is a very allergenic product indeed. So we thought that perhaps the ship had unloaded or transported castor beans before, or that soybeans could have been contaminated with castor bean dust. And our preliminary expectations were more related to castor beans rather than to soybeans. But the results were striking for us, so we were really surprised to see that patients were mostly negative to the allergens that had been included in the test, but specifically positive to soybean.
Later that same year, on September the 4th, there was another very nasty outbreak. Indeed, this time there were 2 deaths. So although the evidence for soybeans as the direct cause of the outbreaks was far from overwhelming, the Barcelona authorities decided to stop soybean unloading while its guilt or innocence was investigated. After all, they had no alternative theory, and the problem was now of great public concern. Soybean unloading in the harbour was stopped for 3 months while the theory was investigated. This investigation had 3 main parts, each involving yet more statistical analysis. First, the team looked back at the records for 1985 to 86. They looked at the number of asthma admissions to hospital on each day. And although it's hard to make out the fine detail in this picture, the asthma epidemic days do stand out. The investigators then looked at how the unloading of various products in the harbour, including soybeans, matched up with the asthma outbreak days. This table shows that during the 468 days on which there were no soybean unloadings, there was never an asthma outbreak. All 13 outbreak days happened during the 262 days on which soybean unloading took place. But why weren't there 262 asthma epidemics? Well, the weather conditions also played their part. The winds had to blow from the southwest, and they had to be strong enough to carry the dust over the city, but not so strong that the dust wouldn't settle. Only soybean unloadings matched up so strikingly with the epidemic days. It's true that 7 outbreak days did coincide with the 406 cotton unloading days. But 6 more outbreaks occurred on days when there was no cotton unloading. A second check on the soybean hypothesis involved laboratory work. Blood samples were taken from some 86 of the victims of the asthma outbreaks in September 1987, and they were tested to see if they reacted to soybean extracts. 64 of the 86 samples, about 3/4, did react, a high proportion. But how